Welcome to this next topic in our course on medical devices, where we will give you a brief overview on the combination products and pharmaceuticals. We won't go into too much detail in this course around pharmaceuticals, but it's worth knowing a little about the regulatory and development pathways if your device is a combination device or has other medicinal drug aspects. Here is what we will cover today. First, we will look at combination products and their relationship between drugs and medical devices. Next, we'll look at the drug development funnel and the regulatory landscape for pharmaceutical in Europe. We'll close with a step-by-step overview on how a new medicine can be registered and placed on the market. Combination products involve both a medicinal product and a medical device, and knowing the regulations you must comply to depend on the product's primary mode of action. A good example is an asthma inhaler. The most important feature of this product, the so-called primary mode of action, is the delivery of medicine, and so they are therefore regulated as medicinal products. The same is true for a hormone patch. This is also a medicine. The medical device, the patch, is just helping the medicine get into the body where it can have a pharmacological effect. If it were the other way around, for instance, like in the case of a stent treated with antibiotics, this would be instead considered a medical device because the primary mode of action for the product is not medicinal but mechanical. In the EU, combination products are registered either as medicinal products, requiring clinical trials and GMP compliance, or as medical devices needing technical files and CE marking. There is no special pathway for the registration of combination products in the EU, and it can be complicated to navigate this area. But let's clarify what we mean when we say medicinal product. What exactly is it, and what makes a product medicinal? The answer, according to the European Medicines Agency, is that a product is considered a medicine if it treats a disease and does so by pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic action. If it does not, then it is something else, like a medical device or a food supplement. The way pharmaceuticals are developed and regulated is also quite different from what we have discussed previously for medical devices. The drug development process is often much longer and can be much more expensive as the burden to assure compliance is higher. There are also stricter requirements for ongoing quality and batch control, making it more resource-intensive for a developer to convert a drug candidate into a marketable medicine. Here we see the drug development funnel, which consists of 3 critical phases. It shows the time it usually takes to complete each phase, as well as the number of failed drug candidates per successful medicine. The goal of drug development is to generate the proof that a drug is effective, safe, and that it can be manufactured with high quality. The first thing we must establish is that our potential candidate seems to have an effect on the illness that it is supposed to treat. This is done through laboratory testing in the early non-clinical phase. Once we have established a strong case for the effect, the next focus will be to ensure that it is safe. This is done in the late stages of the non-clinical phase. Actually most of the candidates, will fail to overcome this hurdle and be removed from consideration within the first 5 years of their development. But if a promising candidate is found to be both effective and safe in laboratory and animal studies, then it can enter into the 3-stage clinical phase, where it is tested on human beings, specifically to establish if it is effective on humans as well, and also to confirm it continues to be safe. What about quality then? Manufacturing methods are developed from the late non-clinical phase and onwards. And after about 5 years of the clinical phase, all the data that was collected should be enough to prove that the drug candidate is ready for the final stage, registration. In this stage, the regulatory authorities spend the next 1 to 2 years examining the proof that the developer has delivered, and then they either approve or reject the candidate. If the application is approved, then the medicine can be sold in that territory. Did you catch the significance of that last statement? Territory-specific regulations is one of the many challenges facing drug developers. There is no worldwide approval for a submission. Each region or country has its own approval system that a drug developer must have approval from before a drug can be sold in that market. When it comes to the regulatory landscape for pharmaceuticals, the structure and roles of the regulatory players in the EU can be difficult to understand along with the documentation for compliance. At the top, we find directives and regulations. You must follow all regulations as they are considered law when in effect, but directives offer some flexibility for EU member states. In both cases, there is not much practical detail in them, and so interpretation may be required for your specific regulatory situation. Then there are guidelines, which are just that, guides. They are almost as important as the directives and regulations and can be very helpful to clarify requirements and are divided into different subjects. And finally, at the bottom of the hierarchy, there are a number of standards referenced in and by the guidelines. They are not regulatory documents at all, but useful on specific matters where a common or standard approach is beneficial. The EU pharmaceutical law is found in the EudraLex governed by the European Commission in Brussels, available for download from the Commission's website. The EudraLex consists of 10 volumes, and here's how it appears on the European Commission's website. Volumes 1 and 5 contain the legislation for human and veterinary products respectively, and the other volumes contain the guidelines for the different fields necessary when preparing the technical documentation. We also have other guidelines for keeping the medicine on the market once it has been approved. If you are working in GMP manufacturing, which is critical for drug manufacturing, you'll want to consult Volume 4. Here in Volume 4, we see the principles and guidelines of good manufacturing practice in respect of medicinal products for human use and investigational medicinal products for human use. It is divided into 4 parts that were added at different times. We also have guidelines for keeping the medicine on the market once it has been approved. Pharmacopoeias are official quality standards for medicines and their ingredients. Again, most major regions have their own pharmacopoeia, and they are not fully harmonized between each other. Important parts of pharmacopoeias are the analysis methods for standard tests and the long list of monographs, which are the recipes for medicines and the various ingredients, reagents, and other substances used in the medicinal area. So far, we now know more about what is regulatory affairs and who are the key regulators in EU markets. Let's now move on to our third area, how to use the collected data to submit an application for approval. To do this, we'll follow a 3-step process applicable for the EU. First, we'll identify the missing information we need. Then look to test our medicine in a trial. And lastly, we'll seek marketing approval for our medicine. During the processes of building the file or during the research and development phases, it is possible and advisable to ask for scientific advice in the EU. You can ask about any subject, but most of the questions are around study designs for the clinical or non-clinical studies. You will need to come with a proposal for the regulators to approve or not. You can't ask open questions, unfortunately. The approvals at this stage are not binding, and when the final file is assessed in its entirety, the advice may not be followed. But most often it is. The second step in the EU is the clinical trial application. For every clinical trial you conduct, you need to get approval. You send in a CTA to the local authorities where the study will be run and get the approval for both the content of the technical file and study protocol. An ethical approval stating that the trial is ethically motivated to conduct this study on humans is also required. In the US, the system for clinical trial approval is similar to the EU, but with some important differences. First, in the US, the application is called an Investigational New Drug Application, Indiana. One of the main differences here is that you file an IND for the entire clinical program. Then you file annual reports on the progress of the trial to the FDA, who have the possibility to halt the program if they are not satisfied with the status. If you have to change something during the clinical program, then you can do this through a formal change process to be assessed and hopefully approved. Now we are finally at the starting point of the marketing authorization application, the moment where you submit the documentation to the relevant authority. The application for marketing authorization in the EU takes 210 days, or 7 months in theory. In reality, the average time is 400 days, which is due to the different levels of review by scientific committees and ultimately the European Commission, who gives the final approval. Let's summarize. No matter if you are in the EU or the US, the drug development funnel starts in the early discovery phase by finding drug candidates that are efficient in treating the disease you have targeted. Once you have identified promising candidates, you need to determine if they are safe too. Candidates that are found to be both efficient and safe can be included in your clinical trial application or investigational new drug trial. This is your first mandatory regulatory contact. If the clinical tests are successful, you can apply for a marketing authorization. Once you get this, you can then market and sell the product in the region where you got approval. A lot of regulatory work is connected to communicating and implementing post-marketing authorization changes, perhaps much more so than for medical devices. This completes our brief introduction on pharmaceuticals. Many resources are available online to deepen your understanding, and completing training in GMP compliance is a great first step if you are interested to pursue this area further.